Have you ever seen old lighthouses that worked without electricity and felt like that story is missing something? Because some of these towers didn't just glow, they behaved like machines. In keeper logs, the light is described as stable in a raging storm, not flickering like a flame. In old photos, you can spot sealed cabinets, thick pipes, and metal boxes that look like they belong in a factory, not in a simple lamp room. And here's where it gets weird. In a few places, the tower has a locked room under the lantern, marked in plans but never explained. Some pages in the logbooks are gone, cleanly removed. Before and after photos show a device in the lantern room, and then later prints where that same object is missing, like it was never there. Even stranger, different lighthouses in different countries show the same repeating layout, like they were built from one hidden template. So, what were these towers really doing? If it wasn't electricity, and it wasn't just oil in a wick, then what power made these lights so steady, so timed, so system-like? And why does history keep acting like the operating principle was never explained? Were old lighthouses just guiding ships? Or were they part of something bigger that got quietly removed? Have you ever seen old lighthouses that worked without electricity and felt like that story is missing something? Because some of these towers didn't just glow, they acted like machines. In keeper logs, the light is described as stable in a raging storm, not flickering like a flame. In old photos, you can spot sealed cabinets, thick pipes, and metal boxes that look like they belong in a workshop, not in a simple lamp room. And here's where it gets weird. In a few places, the tower has a locked room under the lantern, marked in plans but never explained. Some pages in the logbooks are gone, cleanly removed. Before and after photos show a device in the lantern room, and then later prints where that same object is missing, like it was never there. Even stranger, different lighthouses in different countries show the same repeating layout, like they were built from one hidden template. So, what were these towers really doing? If it wasn't electricity, and it wasn't just oil in a wick, then what power made these lights so steady, so timed, so system-like? And why does history keep acting like the operating principle was never explained? Were old lighthouses just guiding ships? Or were they part of something bigger that got quietly removed? Let's find out. Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, November 1879. Rain lashes the Atlantic in sheets. Waves climb 30 feet. The wind screams through the rigging of a merchant vessel, forcing its way north along the outer banks. The captain stands at the helm, soaked through. His crew has been awake for 19 hours. The compass spins. The horizon is gone. And then, through the chaos, a light. Not the weak orange flicker of a flame struggling against the gale. Something different. A beam. White, steady. Cutting through the storm like a knife through cloth. The captain later writes in his log, "Light observed at bearing northeast, unusually stable, did not waver, appeared mechanical in character." Mechanical in character. A strange phrase for a lighthouse that, according to official records, ran on nothing more than kerosene and a wick. The keeper's log from that same night survives in the National Archives. Most entries are routine: weather conditions, oil use, lens rotation checks. Yet one line sits there like a splinter. Light stable during gale, no intervention required. No intervention required. In a storm that should have torn the flame apart. In winds that pushed past 60 miles per hour. The light held, steady, bright, unchanged. The official explanation is clean and comforting. The Fresnel lens, that beautiful prismatic glass assembly, could focus even a small flame so well it would travel miles out to sea. The lens does the heavy lifting. The flame is just the source. But when researchers looked closely at photographs of the Cape Hatteras lantern room from that era, they noticed something that doesn't fit that tidy picture. Behind the lens, beneath the lantern housing, a cabinet, metal, rectangular, and fitted with pipes that drop through the floor, disappearing into the tower's core. No mention of this cabinet appears in the lighthouse's official equipment list. No maintenance notes describe what it does. No keeper's manual tells anyone how to use it. It simply exists in the photographs, silent, unnamed, and then, in photographs taken after 1920, After the tower was modernized, the cabinet is gone. The pipes are gone. The floor where they once passed through shows fresh patching, like someone poured new material right over the wound, as if something was removed, then sealed, then quietly forgotten. A simple oil lamp doesn't need cabinets. A wick and a lens don't demand pipes running through a tower like veins. So, what was it? What sat behind that perfect steady beam, hidden in plain sight, while ships fought for their lives in the dark? And why, decades later, did someone go to the trouble of tearing it out and leaving the official story behind like nothing ever happened? The history we inherit is clean, orderly, comfortable. Lighthouses, we are told, evolved in a straight line. Fire, then oil, then gas, then electricity. Each stage replaces the last, like pages in a children's book about progress. The earliest beacons were rough and brutal. Bonfires on cliff tops, iron baskets packed with burning coal, smoke and flame, visible for only a few miles at best. Unreliable, dangerous. The keepers who tended them sometimes burned alongside their own fires. Then came the oil lamp. Whale oil at first, later kerosene. A wick, a reservoir, a steady flame. Simple enough to spread everywhere, and consistent enough to become the standard by the mid-19th century. The breakthrough, so the story goes, was the lens. In 1822, a French physicist named Augustin Jean Fresnel designed a new kind of optical system. Instead of one curved mirror, his lens used concentric rings of glass, each cut and angled with precision to grab light from a small flame and bend it into one focused, powerful beam. The Fresnel lens changed everything. A flame no bigger than a candle could now throw light roughly 20 miles out to sea. Lighthouses became dependable. Shipwrecks declined. The age of modern maritime safety began. This is the version taught in schools, printed in museum brochures, repeated in documentaries. And, for most lighthouses, it is true. Most towers really did run on oil, wick, and glass. The keepers really did climb those spiral stairs each evening and light the seal flame by hand. The lens really did turn a small glow into something ships could follow through darkness. But not all towers fit the template. Fastnet Rock, Ireland, 1854. The first Fastnet lighthouse was built on a jagged outcrop 9 miles off the southern Irish coast. The location was brutal, exposed to Atlantic storms, reachable only in calm weather, surrounded by currents that had claimed hundreds of vessels. The tower's supply records from its early years list what you would expect: oil barrels, bundles of wick, cleaning cloths, replacement glass panels. Yet, buried in a shipment manifest from 1867, a single entry sits there like it doesn't belong. Regulator assembly, brass, 12 components, handle with care. Regulator assembly. The word regulator appears nowhere else in Fastnet's equipment logs. No maintenance schedule mentions it. No keeper's manual describes it. No later inventory explains what it controlled or why it mattered. And the term itself is the problem. A regulator is not just a spare part. It's a device that controls something, adjusts it, steadies it, governs it. A wick doesn't need regulation. A flame burn, or it doesn't. Oil flows by gravity from reservoir to burner. So what exactly was being regulated? The manifest offers no answer. The item arrives, it is signed for. And then, silence. No record of installation, no mention of repair, no note of removal. It enters the lighthouse's story like a stone dropped into water. A brief ripple, then nothing. Sevastopol, Crimea, 1861. Across Europe, in the archives of the Imperial Russian Navy, a similar anomaly shows up. A requisition form for the Chersonesus lighthouse lists the usual supplies: fuel, glass, rope, paint. The handwriting is neat, bureaucratic, unremarkable, except for one line added in different ink, as if it was written after the main document was already finished. Acoustic dampening. Panels. Quantity 4 for lantern room installation. Acoustic dampening. Panels meant to absorb sound. Why would a lighthouse, a building whose whole job is to produce light, need to control sound? A flame is almost silent. Oil moving through a pipe does not roar. Even the clockwork that turned Fresnel lenses would only make a faint, steady clicking. Yet someone in 1861 believed the Chersonesus lantern room would generate enough noise to require suppression. What sound were they expecting? And more importantly, what was making it? The official story gives us oil, wick, and lens, clean, simple, settled. But when you pull the thread, when you look past museum plaques and into the original documents, you start finding words that don't belong. Regulator, dampening, light stable during gale, mechanical in character, small cracks in a comfortable history, cracks that suggest some towers were built for more than flame. The next clue would not come from a supply manifest or a keeper's log. It would come from the architecture itself, from a room that appears on blueprints but was never meant to be opened. Blueprints do not lie. They can't. Every line has a job. Every space is drawn for a reason. Architects don't sketch doors that lead nowhere. Engineers don't plan chambers with no purpose. When a room appears on a plan, it was meant to be built. And when that room is built, but never explained, the silence itself becomes a clue. The Eddystone Lighthouse stands 14 miles off the coast of Plymouth, England. 4 towers have occupied that spot since 1698. The current structure, completed in 1882, is still praised as one of the great engineering achievements of the Victorian era. The official drawings survive in the archives of Trinity House, the authority responsible for English lighthouses since the 16th century. Most pages show exactly what you'd expect: foundation plans, masonry schedules, lens specifications, fuel storage calculations. But on sheet 17, there is a detail you will not find discussed in the public history of the tower. Beneath the lantern room, directly under the lens assembly, the blueprint shows a chamber, small, cylindrical, reachable only through a hatch in the floor of the service room above. The chamber is labeled with 2 words: apparatus space. No further description, no equipment list, no note explaining what apparatus the space was meant to hold. And then you notice something else. The room has vents, 3 of them, running vertically through the tower's core, connecting the chamber to openings near the base. The drawings even show airflow direction: upward, constant, controlled. A ventilation system for a room that officially holds nothing. Why would engineers design dedicated airflow for an empty space? Point Reyes, California, 1870. Across the Atlantic, the same kind of pattern appears. Again, the Point Reyes Lighthouse was built into a cliff face 300 feet above the Pacific. The location was chosen for visibility. Fog permitting, the light could be seen for 24 miles. Construction records describe the struggle: high winds, unstable rock, and a 300-step staircase carved into the cliffside just to reach the tower. The original blueprints held at the National Archives in San Francisco show the expected layout. Keeper's quarters at the top of the cliff. The tower perched on a narrow ledge below. Fuel room, watch room, lantern room. And beneath the lantern, a sealed compartment. The compartment has no normal door, no window, no obvious access from inside the tower. The only entry shown on the plans is a small hatch in the floor, drawn with a lock mechanism in unusually careful detail. A note in the margin, written in pencil, reads, "Do not open during operation." The handwriting matches the lead engineer's signature on other documents. Do not open during operation. What operation? The lamp above burns steadily. The lens rotates on its clockwork track. If the room below is empty, if it holds nothing but air, what danger could opening it possibly cause? And here's another odd detail. The penciled warning was never inked over, never made official. It remains in the draft, like the engineer wanted the instruction followed, but did not want it recorded in the final version. Cordouan, France, 1611. The oldest functioning lighthouse in France stands at the mouth of the Gironde estuary. Construction began in 1584. The tower has been modified, expanded, and restored over 4 centuries. Yet one feature has stayed in place since the earliest design. A spiral staircase descends from the lantern level into the tower's core. At the 3rd landing, a door appears on every surviving plan. That door leads to a chamber roughly 12 feet in diameter. The chamber has never been photographed from the inside. No published inventory describes its contents. Tour guides, when asked, tend to call it a storage area or a former chapel. But the 1611 construction notes suggest something else. They describe a domed ceiling, walls lined with a specific stone, chosen for its density, brought from a quarry 200 miles away. A floor laid with iron grating, built so air could pass through from a shaft below. Storage rooms don't need domed ceilings. Chapels don't require iron grating and vertical airflow. This chamber was built to contain something that demanded controlled ventilation, something that needed isolation from the rooms above and below. And for more than 400 years, no official record has clearly stated what the something was. 3 lighthouses, 3 continents, 3 closed rooms, each one designed with care, each one tied to airflow systems that serve no simple, obvious purpose. Each one marked by warnings, omissions, or careful vagueness that suggests the contents were never meant to be discussed. The architecture remembers what the histories forgot. And if these rooms were built to hold apparatus, machinery, equipment of some kind, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What were those machines supposed to do? The answer may lie not only in what the towers contained, but in how they behaved. Specifically, in their timing. A flame flickers. It breathes with the wind, dims when fuel runs low, surges when fresh oil reaches the wick. Fire feels alive, and by nature, it isn't perfectly predictable. Yet some lighthouse logs describe light patterns so precise they could set a ship's chronometer. Not approximate, not roughly every 10 seconds. Exact, measured, repeatable across hours, days, whole seasons, with no drift. The official explanation is clockwork. By the mid-19th century, engineers had built rotating mechanisms for Fresnel lenses, Cephbursts. System of weights, gears, and governors could turn the lens at a steady pace, creating the flash pattern that identified each lighthouse. One station might flash every 5 seconds, another every 12. The rhythm became a signature, a way for navigators to know exactly which light they were seeing. The technology was elegant, effective, and well documented. But it only explains rotation. It does not explain intensity. It does not explain flash duration. And it does not explain how 2 lighthouses, separated by an ocean, could produce flash timing so similar that authorities began wondering if someone had copied the numbers. Bishop Rock, England, 1858. The Bishop Rock Lighthouse marks the westernmost point of the Isles of Scilly. The tower stands on a granite outcrop barely large enough to hold its foundation. Winter waves can climb high enough to strike near the lantern level. The station's flash pattern was officially recorded as 2 white flashes every 15 seconds. Shipping logs from vessels passing Bishop Rock between 1860 and 1875 confirm the rhythm. Flash, pause, 15 seconds, again and again, night after night, year after year. The consistency alone isn't shocking. Good clockwork can keep time, but the length of each flash, the precise slice of time the light stayed visible, is where the story changes. Multiple captains noted that each flash lasted exactly 1/4 second, not briefly, not for an instant, 1/4 second, as if it was clocked. How would a sea captain in 1863 know a flash lasted exactly 1/4 second? He wouldn't, unless it was so consistent, so machine-like, that timing it became possible. A rotating lens creates a flash by sweeping a beam across the observer. The flash length depends on rotation speed, which depends on the clockwork, which depends on friction, temperature, the weight of the lens, the thickness of the oil, the condition of the bearings, the way lubricant behaves in cold air. Variables, a lot of them. Any one of them can introduce tiny irregularities. Yet, Bishop Rock's flash keeps landing on 1/4 second. Across years, across seasons, across storms that shook the tower hard enough to rattle a man's teeth. The clockwork explanation starts to strain. Minot's Ledge, Massachusetts, 1860. 3,000 miles west, another lighthouse. Another strange kind of consistency. Minot's Ledge stands on a submerged rock 1 mile off the coast of Cohasset. The first tower, built in 1850, was destroyed by a storm within 5 years. The second, completed in 1860, used a new granite construction that has survived every hurricane since. The station's flash pattern became famous. 1 flash, 4 flashes, 3 flashes, pause, repeat. Locals called it the I love you light. 143, charming, memorable. And, according to logbooks, timed with a level of tightness that shouldn't be easy on open water. A report from the Boston Marine Society in 1871 compared timing records from 12 different vessels that had passed Minot's Ledge over a 3-month period. The flash intervals matched to within 1/10 of a second, 1/10 of a second, across 12 ships, across roughly 90 days. The author called the consistency remarkable and credited the keeper's diligence. But diligence can't create mechanical precision. A keeper can trim wicks, polish lenses, win clockwork, and keep the fuel clean. He cannot, by sheer effort, make a flame behave like a calibrated device, unless the flame wasn't acting alone. The coincidence that was in 1874, a British naval survey compared flash timing data from Bishop Rock and Minot's Ledge. The work was routine, part of an effort to standardize lighthouse identification charts for international navigation. The result was not routine. Both lights, despite different lens setups and different recorded rotation speeds, produced primary flashes of identical duration, 1/4 second. Exactly. The surveyors flagged the match. They checked their numbers twice. Then they wrote to both stations asking for equipment details. Bishop Rock replied with standard information: lens type, clockwork maker, oil use rates. Minot's Ledge did not reply. Postal records show the request was received, but no response was ever sent back. The survey was published anyway, with a thin, easy label placed over the problem. The identical timing was listed as an artifact of measurement methodology. An artifact. A coincidence. A clerical echo. Or something else. Something that would require admitting these towers shared more than ocean and purpose. Something that didn't just shine, but regulated itself. Something that hummed in the structure, pulsed in the beam, and kept time. Like a heartbeat, even when no heartbeat should have been there. Precision can be engineered. Timing can be calibrated. But there's one thing that's hard to fake. The physical feeling of standing in a room where something invisible is working. The keepers felt it. They wrote about it. And then, almost always, they stopped writing. As if someone told them to. The reports are scattered across archives in 5 countries. Personal diaries, letters home, incident logs that were never meant for the public. Each one circles the same impossible detail. The lighthouse hummed, not the creak of wood in the wind, not the groan of metal as it warms and cools. A hum, low, steady, constant, heard and felt at the same time. A vibration that seemed to rise from the floor, pass through the bones, and settle somewhere behind the eyes. St. Catherine's Lighthouse, Isle of Wight, 1842. Thomas Pellow served as assistant keeper at St. Catherine's for 11 years. His personal journal survives in the collection of a private maritime museum in Portsmouth. Most entries are ordinary: weather, supplies, complaints about damp walls. But in March of 1847, Pellow writes something that doesn't belong in a routine log. The lantern room hums on clear nights, not wind, not the lens turning, something beneath, asked the principal keeper. He told me not to write about it. Pellow followed the instruction. For a while. 2 months later, another entry appears. The hum was strong tonight, could feel it through my boots, metal fixtures warm to the touch even before lighting. Cannot explain. Metal fixtures warm to the touch, before the lamp was lit, before any flame had been introduced, heat without fire. Pellow's journal ends abruptly in 1849. The final entry notes only that he has been reassigned to shore duties effective immediately. No reason given, no farewell, no mention of whether the hum continued after. He left. Cape Otway, Australia, 1859. 12,000 miles from the Isle of Wight, a different keeper recorded something with the same unsettling shape. William Baxter arrived at Cape Otway in 1857. His letters to his wife in Melbourne describe isolation, endless maintenance, and the quiet grind of watching the sea. In August of 1859, the tone changes. The light behaves strangely in storms. It holds steady when it should not. The glass warms before I touch flamed wick. Last night I placed my hand on the lens housing and felt it vibrate, a low pulse, like a sleeping heart. A sleeping heart. Baxter's wife kept the letters after his death in 1863. In a separate note, she wrote that her husband became troubled in his final years, convinced the lighthouse operated itself, and that his role was only to watch and not interfere. That phrase matters. It echoes across oceans. Do not open during. Operation. Do not write about it. Watch and not interfere. Instructions given. Questions discouraged. Tillamook Rock, Oregon. 1881. The Tillamook Rock Lighthouse was built on a basalt island 1 mile offshore, battered by waves so violent they sometimes threw rocks through the lantern room glass. Keepers called it Terrible Tilly. The assignment was treated like punishment duty, a posting for men who had failed elsewhere or had nowhere else to go. The station log from January of 1887 contains an entry that was later crossed out with heavy ink. The original words are still partly readable under magnification. Vibration continues even when mechanism stopped for cleaning. Source unknown. Jay reported tingling in chest after 30 minutes in lantern room. Advised all staff to limit exposure. Limit exposure. To what? The official equipment list shows oil tanks, a first-order Fresnel lens, clockwork rotation gear. Nothing that should produce vibration when stopped. Nothing that should cause a tingling in the chest. Nothing that should make trained keepers treat the lantern room like a place you visit in short shifts. The crossed-out entry was never explained. No follow-up report appears. The log simply continues the next day with routine weather notes, as if the line had never existed. But it did exist. Someone recorded it, and someone else, with different ink in different handwriting, tried to bury it. The pattern completes 3 locations, 3 keepers, 3 separate accounts of things that should not happen in a simple oil and lens system. A hum that persists without an obvious mechanical cause. Heat that appears before flame. Vibration strong enough to make men step back, leave the room, and limit their time near the light. The official record offers no explanation, because the official record was never meant to hold these details. They survived in private journals, personal letters, and margins of logs that slipped past review. The keepers knew something was happening. They felt it through their boots in the warmth of metal that should have been cold, in the strange pressure in the chest that doesn't come from a lamp. They were told not to ask, told not to write, told to maintain the system without understanding it. And now, with 5 clues gathered, the impossible brightness, the regulator, the sealed chambers, the clock-like timing, the hum and heat, one question becomes unavoidable. What were these lighthouses actually built to do? The first act of our investigation ends here. The small cracks in the comfortable story have widened into gaps too large to ignore. What comes next is the main phase, where we stop collecting clues and begin assembling the machine. We've been taught to see lighthouses as lamps, tall, bright, simple, a tower to hold a flame above the waves, a lens to focus the glow, a keeper to tend the fire, nothing more. But look closer. Look at the blueprints, the construction records, the engineering notes that still sit in maritime archives. What shows up is not a lampstand. It's a system, integrated, planned, and more sophisticated than the simple lamp story makes it sound. A lighthouse is not just a light. A lighthouse is a body, the anatomy of a tower. Start from the ground up. At the base, foundations bite deep into rock or seabed. They're engineered to absorb vibration, resist tidal forces, and stay stable in conditions that would tear ordinary buildings apart. Above the foundation sits the service level, fuel storage, equipment rooms, and, in many towers, chambers that are never clearly explained. They're marked on plans, but they're missing from visitor guides. They exist on paper, and they exist in the structure, but they rarely exist in the story. From the service level, the tower shaft rises like a spine. Inside, a spiral staircase winds upward, but the staircase is not alone. Running alongside it, in many historic towers, are vertical channels, ducts, shafts, and conduits that connect the base to the lantern room above. These channels are usually described as ventilation. Air has to circulate to feed the flame, prevent heat buildup, and keep the lantern room usable. That sounds reasonable. Until you look at the sizes. Portland Bill, England, 1906. The Portland Bill Lighthouse replaced an earlier structure in 1906. Construction documents survive in the Trinity House archives, including detailed cross-sections of the tower's interior. In those drawings, a ventilation shaft is mapped with careful precision. It runs from a chamber at ground level up through the tower's core and ends in a vented housing just below the lantern room floor. The shaft diameter is recorded as 18 inches. 18 inches for a ventilation system serving a single oil lamp. For comparison, a typical household chimney flue measures roughly 6 to 8 inches. Industrial furnaces of the same era used flues closer to 12 inches. A lighthouse burning a few pints of kerosene per night would need a fraction of that airflow. Yet, Portland Bill's engineers specified 18 inches. And that detail matters, because an 18-inch shaft isn't cheap, not when you're cutting through solid stone. Every extra inch means more labor, more time, more cost. So, why build ventilation 3 times larger than necessary? Unless ventilation wasn't the only job. The lens room, as control center, now move upward, past the ducts, past the shafts, into the lantern room itself. The lens dominates the space, concentric rings of glass in a brass framework, turning slowly on a bed of mercury or on ball bearings. The flame sits at the center, and the lens captures the light, bends it, focuses it, and throws it out to sea. That much is true, that much is documented, but the lens is not the whole room. In tower after tower, old photographs show additional hardware around it. Metal housings, glass gauges, panels with unmarked dials, cabinets bolted to the floor. With no clear explanation in any keeper's manual, that changes the feel of the space. The lantern room wasn't built like a display case for a beautiful lens. It was built like a work area, a control center, a place where something was monitored, adjusted, and maintained. The body model. Step back and see the whole structure at once. The foundation anchors and absorbs, like feet planted on stone. The service level stores and processes, like lungs drawing breath. The shaft carries channels upward, like a spine carrying signals. The lantern room outputs and controls, like eyes and brain combined. This isn't just a lamp, it's closer to an organism, designed with redundancy, integration, and purpose that goes beyond a flame on a tower. The question is no longer whether lighthouses were complex. The blueprints prove they were. The question is, what function demanded that complexity? A flame needs fuel, wick, and air. It does not need 18-inch shafts, sealed chambers, acoustic dampening, or cabinets filled with unmarked equipment. So, something else was happening inside these towers. Something that required infrastructure far beyond the needs of fire. The keepers maintained it. The engineers designed it. The authorities supervised it. And when the time came to modernize, to replace oil with electricity, a lot of that extra infrastructure was quietly removed. As if the light had only ever been part of the story. As if the real machinery had already served its purpose and was no longer needed, or perhaps no longer wanted. If a lighthouse is just a lamp, its lantern room should look like a lantern room. A lens, a flame, perhaps a small table for the keeper's tools. Simple, sparse, functional. But the photographs tell a different story. Hunting Island, South Carolina, 1875. The original lantern room photographs from Hunting Island survive in the South Carolina Historical Society archives. They were taken during a routine inspection, meant to document the condition of the lens and housing. The lens is there, a second-order Fresnel, gleaming in the afternoon light. The flame apparatus sits at its center, exactly as expected. But behind the lens, pressed against the curved wall of the lantern room, stands a cabinet. Metal, painted black, fitted with 3 circular gauges on its front panel. No labels, no markings, no mention in the inspection report. To the left of the cabinet, a series of copper pipes emerge from the floor, run horizontally for approximately 4 feet, then disappear into a junction box mounted at waist height. Junction boxes connect things. They route wires, tubes, conduits. They exist where systems meet, where one function hands off to another. What systems required connection in an oil lamp room? The inspection photographs were filed without comment. The cabinet and pipes appear in no subsequent documentation. When the lighthouse was decommissioned in 1933, the lantern room was stripped. Modern photographs show bare walls, empty floors, and a lens that now sits in a museum. The cabinet is gone, the pipes are gone, The junction box might never have existed. Roter Sand, Germany, 1885. In the North Sea, 14 miles from the German coast, stands one of the most unusual lighthouses ever constructed. Roter Sand was built on a caisson, a massive iron cylinder sunk into the seafloor and filled with concrete. The tower's lantern room was photographed extensively during construction. German engineering pride demanded documentation. In one image, dated 1885, the lens assembly is being installed. Workers stand on scaffolding, guiding the brass framework into position. Behind them, already mounted to the wall, is a panel, rectangular, metal, fitted with 12 identical switches arranged in 2 rows of 6. 12 switches. For what? A single flame requires no switches. A rotating lens requires only a clockwork mechanism, wound by hand, driven by weights. 12 switches imply 12 functions, 12 circuits, 12 controlled operations. The panel appears in no technical specification. No operating manual references its use. Later photographs, taken after 1945, show the wall where it once hung. The wall is bare. Fresh paint covers the mounting holes. The pattern language Hunting Island, Roter Sand, Portland Bill, Cape Otway, Fastnet Rock. Different countries, different decades, different engineering traditions. Yet the lantern rooms share a visual language, cabinets of similar proportion, pipes running in the parallel configurations, panels with gauges, switches, dials, junction boxes connecting systems that officially do not exist. The equipment was standardized, not identical, but following a template, a design philosophy, a shared understanding of what a lantern room should contain. Lighthouse authorities did not share construction secrets across borders. British engineers did not collaborate with German builders. American and Australian stations operated under separate administrations. Yet, the pattern repeats, as if the design originated from a single source, a common ancestor, a template distributed before the borders of modern nations hardened, and then quietly forgotten, or quietly erased. The lens rooms were not display cases. They were workshops, control stations, nodes in a system whose full extent we are only beginning to trace. And that system, it seems, included something the official histories never mention. Light travels far, but light cannot penetrate fog. When mist rolled in, thick, gray, absolute, the beam became useless. Ships still needed warning. They needed sound. This is why lighthouses gained voices. The foghorn became standard equipment by the mid-19th century, a mechanical system that produced low, resonant blasts capable of traveling miles across open water. Compressed air forced through metal horns, vibrating diaphragms, steam-driven pistons. The official history treats light and sound as separate functions. The lens handled visibility. The foghorn handled fog. 2 systems, 2 purposes, 2 sets of equipment. But in certain towers, the boundary between light and sound begins to blur. Souter Lighthouse, England, 1871. Souter was the first lighthouse in the world designed from the ground up to use electric light. It opened in 1871, decades before most towers converted from oil. The station also housed one of the most powerful foghorn installations in Britain. Twin horns driven by compressed air, capable of producing blasts audible from 20 miles at sea. The systems were officially independent. Separate fuel supplies, separate maintenance schedules, separate operating instructions. Yet the construction drawings reveal something peculiar. Both systems shared the same vertical shaft. The shaft ran from the engine room at ground level up through the tower's core. Officially, it provided ventilation and cable routing, but the drawings show junction points, places where light infrastructure and sound infrastructure intersected. 3 junction points, evenly spaced, marked only with numbers, no descriptions. Why would light and sound systems need to connect? The official answer is that they did not. The shared shaft was merely economical, one channel serving multiple purposes. But economy does not explain the junction points. Economy does not explain why. In the operating logs from 1873, a keeper notes that the foghorn would not sound correctly until the lamp was lit. Would not sound correctly A foghorn is mechanical: air, pressure, vibration. The presence or absence of a flame in a room above should have no effect on its operation, unless the two systems were linked, unless the light was not just light and the sound was not just sound. Point Reyes, California, 1870. Return to Point Reyes. The lighthouse with the sealed chamber beneath the lantern room. The penciled note, "Do not open during operation." Point Reyes also housed a fog signal, a steam-powered siren that became infamous among keepers for its deafening volume. Maintenance logs from 1882 record a peculiar incident. The fog signal began producing secondary tones, harmonic frequencies that should not have existed given the equipment specifications. The chief keeper investigated. His report, preserved in the National Archives, states that the secondary tones ceased when the lamp was extinguished and resumed when the lamp was relit. Ceased when the lamp was extinguished. The fog signal was located in a separate building, 112 feet from the lighthouse tower. No physical connection was visible between the two structures, yet somehow, the flame in the lantern room influenced the sound produced by the foghorn. The keeper's report recommended further investigation by qualified personnel. No follow-up report exists. The file ends there, mid-inquiry. Resonance light and sound are both waves, both frequencies, both capable of traveling vast distances under the right conditions. What if the towers were not producing light and sound as separate outputs, but as components of a single system, a system designed to generate resonance, to project energy, to signal not just ships, but something else, something that required both vibration and illumination working together? The keepers heard it, the logs recorded it, and then the questions stopped, but the interference patterns remained, hidden in the data, waiting to be noticed. If these towers operated as systems, integrated, precise, resonant, then something had to drive them. Flame alone cannot explain the phenomena. Oil produces heat and light, nothing more. It cannot generate the hum keepers described. It cannot create vibrations felt through stone floors. It cannot synchronize timing across oceans with mechanical perfection. Something else was providing power. The obvious answer is electricity. But the obvious answer fails. Most of these towers operated decades before power lines reached their shores. Underwater cables did not exist. Portable generators were rare and unreliable. So, what alternatives existed? Weight-driven mechanisms. The most documented power source in historic lighthouses was gravity itself. Heavy weights, sometimes exceeding 500 pounds, were suspended inside the tower shaft. As the weights descended, they drove clockwork mechanisms. Gears turned, lenses rotated. The flash pattern emerged. Keepers wound the system every few hours, cranking the weights back to the top. The process was exhausting but effective. Weight-driven systems explain rotation. They explain timing. They do not explain heat without flame. They do not explain vibration independent of mechanical movement. They do not explain keepers reporting sensations when the clockwork was stopped for maintenance. Gravity provides steady, predictable force. It does not hum. Compressed air. Several lighthouse stations used compressed air systems, primarily for fog signals. Large tanks were pressurized by steam engines or hand pumps. When released through horns, the air produced sound. Could compressed air explain the anomalies? Partially. Air under pressure can create vibration. Pipes carrying compressed air can produce a low hum. Tanks can warm slightly from the compression process. But compressed air requires constant replenishment. It leaks. It depletes. A system powerful enough to create the phenomena described would require pumping equipment running continuously. The logs do not describe such equipment. Keepers do not mention constant pumping. Fuel records do not show consumption levels consistent with running steam compressors around the clock. Compressed air answers some questions. It leaves others untouched. Chemical and thermal power. The 19th century understood more about energy conversion than modern narratives suggest. Thermoelectric generators, devices that convert heat differences into electrical current, existed in laboratory form by 1821. Electrochemical cells, primitive batteries, were demonstrated even earlier. Could some towers have used thermal gradients, the temperature difference between the cold sea and the warm lantern room, the heat rising through ventilation shafts? The concept is plausible. The evidence is circumstantial. Construction records for certain towers specify materials with unusual thermal properties. Stone imported from distant quarries, metal alloys not standard for structural purposes, copper sheathing in locations where copper served no obvious function. These specifications cost money, significant money. No one imports specialty stone for aesthetic reasons when building on a wave-battered rock 14 miles from shore. The materials were chosen deliberately, for properties beyond strength and durability, but no document states this directly. No engineer confesses. The evidence remains architectural, hidden in the bones of the buildings themselves. The gap that will not close. Every conventional explanation covers part of the mystery. Gravity explains rotation. Compression explains some vibration. Thermal conversion explains potential electrical effects. None explains everything. None accounts for the full pattern, the integration, the resonance, the standardized equipment across continents. And none explains why, when these towers were modernized, so much infrastructure was removed rather than simply upgraded. If the old systems were just primitive versions of electrical power, why not preserve them as engineering curiosities? Why strip the cabinets, fill the shafts, paint over the mounting holes? Unless the old systems worked on principles that someone preferred to forget, principles that left traces, not in the equipment that survived, but in the records that did not. History is written on paper, and paper can be destroyed, not dramatically, not in bonfires or public burnings, but quietly. A page removed from a logbook, a file transferred and never returned, a renovation that erases what came before. The pattern becomes visible only when you know what to look for. Dungeness, England, 1901. The Dungeness Lighthouse underwent a major renovation at the turn of the 20th century. The original tower, built in 1873, was replaced by a new structure better suited to electric conversion. Trinity House archives contain detailed records of the original construction, foundation surveys, material lists, lens, specifications, keeper assignments spanning 28 years. But between 1894 and 1901, the records thinned dramatically. 7 years of logbooks reduced to fragments. Equipment manifests missing entirely. Inspection reports that reference earlier documents that no longer exist in any catalog. A fire? No record of one. A flood? The archives are climate-controlled, located miles from the coast. Administrative error? For 7 consecutive years? The gap is too clean, too specific, too perfectly aligned with the years immediately preceding the modernization that stripped the original tower of its equipment. Whatever those records contained, someone decided it should not survive the transition. Cape Henry, Virginia, 1920. The first Cape Henry lighthouse was built in 1792, one of the earliest in the United States. By 1920, it had been decommissioned, replaced by a newer tower nearby. The National Archives hold extensive documentation of the original station, construction drawings, correspondence between engineers, budget allocations approved by George Washington himself. Yet the operational records from 1860 to 1895 are incomplete, not missing, incomplete. Pages exist, but passages have been removed. Rectangular sections cut cleanly from the paper with a blade. Margins trimmed, eliminating handwritten notes. In 3 separate logbooks, entire weeks have been excised, the binding threads still visible where pages once hung. Archivists noted the damage in a 1952 inventory. Their report describes the condition as deliberate mutilation of uncertain origin. Deliberate mutilation. Someone, at some point, went through these records with a knife and removed specific information. Not randomly, not carelessly, with precision, with purpose. What words required such careful elimination? The before and after photographic evidence follows the same pattern. Consider the sequence from Point Loma, California. The lighthouse was built in 1855, decommissioned in 1991. During its operational years, the station was photographed hundreds of times. Images from 1873 show the lantern room in detail, the lens, the clockwork housing, and behind them, a metal cabinet with 2 cylindrical attachments protruding from its top. Images from 1904 show the same room. The lens is identical. The clockwork appears unchanged, but the cabinet is gone. The wall behind it has been replastered. Fresh paint covers the area where mounting brackets once held the cabinet in place. No renovation is documented for that period. No equipment change is recorded. The cabinet simply vanishes between photographs, and no record explains why. The shape of absence, missing pages, cut paragraphs, vanished equipment, replastered walls. The evidence is not what remains. The evidence is what does not remain. Someone made decisions. Someone chose what future generations would see and what they would never know existed. This was not decay. This was curation. And the curators left just enough behind to reveal their work. A thread here, a shadow there, the outline of something removed, visible in the negative space. The records do not simply collapse. They are collapsed, deliberately, systematically, across decades and continents. Which raises the final question of this phase. If the pattern was hidden so carefully, why does it appear in the same form, in the same towers, across the entire world? One lighthouse with unusual equipment is a curiosity. Two lighthouses with matching anomalies is a coincidence. But when the same pattern repeats across 5 continents, spanning 150 years of construction, coincidence becomes something else entirely. A network. The Atlantic Corridor. Begin with the Atlantic, the busiest shipping lanes of the 19th century, the routes that connected empires, Bishop Rock, England, Fastnet Rock, Ireland, Cape Race, Newfoundland, Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, each station positioned at critical navigation points, each built with sealed chambers, oversized ventilation, and equipment that vanished during modernization. The towers form a line, a corridor of light stretching from Europe to North America. Official histories describe them as independent constructions, each designed by local engineers, funded by local authorities, serving local needs. But the blueprints disagree. Fastnet and Cape Race, separated by 2,000 miles of ocean, share identical shaft dimensions, 18 inches. The same specification used at Portland Bill, built by different engineers 15 years later. Cape Hatteras and Bishop Rock use the same unusual mounting system for their lens housings. A bracket configuration found in no standard engineering manual of the period. How do engineers on opposite sides of an ocean arrive at identical solutions? Without communication? The official answer is parallel development. Independent minds solving similar problems in similar ways. But parallel development does not produce identical measurements. It does not replicate bracket configurations down to the bolt pattern. It does not install matching cabinet styles in lantern rooms that no foreign engineer ever visited. Something was being shared, specifications, templates, a design language that crossed borders without leaving traces in official correspondence. The Pacific Echo. The pattern does not stop at the Atlantic, Cape Otway, Australia, Point Reyes, California, Sado Island, Japan. Each station constructed between 1850 and 1880. Each located at a major maritime choke point, each exhibiting the same architectural anomalies, sealed chambers beneath the lantern room, vertical shafts connecting base to lens. Equipment manifests listing components with no clear function. Sado Island is particularly striking. The Lighthouse was built in 1860 under the supervision of British engineers, part of Japan's rapid modernization during the Meiji period. Construction documents preserved in the Niigata Prefectural Archives include a parts list written in both English and Japanese. Most items translate directly: lens, clockwork, oil reservoir, wick assembly. But 3 items have no Japanese equivalent. They are listed only in English, with a notation that translates roughly to installation supervised by foreign specialist. No local documentation required. No local documentation required. 3 components installed by unnamed foreigners, deliberately excluded from the official record. What were they? The original lighthouse was destroyed during the Second World War. No photographs of the lantern room interior survive. The components, whatever they were, are gone, but the notation remains. Proof that something was installed, proof that someone wanted it kept quiet. The hidden template. Stand back, see the whole map. Atlantic, Pacific, North Sea, Mediterranean, Indian Ocean. The same sealed chambers, the same oversized shafts, the same vanishing equipment, not in every lighthouse, but in specific lighthouses, positioned at critical points, built during a specific window of time, managed by authorities who rarely communicated officially. The pattern is too consistent for accident, too widespread for local tradition, too carefully hidden for coincidence. These towers were not independent constructions, they were nodes, points in a network designed before modern borders solidified, and dismantled before anyone thought to ask why. The second act ends here. The evidence is assembled, the map is drawn. What remains is the hardest part, understanding what the network was for and why it was allowed to disappear. The archives tell one story, the towers themselves tell another. Paper can be cut, photographs can be lost, but stone remembers. Metal holds its shape. The bones of these buildings still stand, waiting for someone to look closely enough. Today, many historic lighthouses operate as museums. Visitors climb spiral staircases, admire polished lenses, and read plaques explaining the simple mechanics of oil and flame. But some rooms remain closed, some doors stay locked, and some questions are answered with silence. St. Augustine, Florida, 2019. The St. Augustine Lighthouse has welcomed visitors since 1994. The museum offers tours, educational programs, and carefully restored exhibits celebrating the station's history since 1874. The main tower is open to the public, 165 steps to the lantern room. The view is spectacular. The lens, a first-order Fresnel, still rotates, though now powered by electricity. But beneath the gift shop, a door is marked staff only. A volunteer, speaking off the record, describes what lies beyond. A corridor, a staircase descending to a basement level that appears on no visitor map. Rooms filled with equipment labeled only with inventory numbers, metal cabinets, sealed containers. Objects moved from the original tower during renovations, but never cataloged for public display. The volunteer has worked at the museum for 12 years. She has never seen anyone open those cabinets. She has never been told what they contain. "We just leave them alone," she says. "That's what we were trained to do. Leave them alone." The phrase echoes across centuries. Do not open during operation. No local documentation required. Watch and not interfere. The instructions change, the silence remains. Lizard Lighthouse, Cornwall, 2021. The Lizard is the southernmost point of mainland Britain. The lighthouse there has operated since 1619, one of the oldest sites in the world. The current tower, built in 1851, is open for heritage tours. Visitors can see the engine room, the lens mechanism, and the keeper's quarters preserved in Victorian style. But the tour does not include the basement. A locked iron gate blocks access. A sign reads, "Structural area, no public access." Structural area, a convenient label, but the building above shows no structural concerns. The tower was renovated in 2008, declared sound by engineering inspectors. Through the gate's bars, visitors can glimpse a corridor extending into darkness. The walls are lined with conduit, metal channels running horizontally before disappearing into the floor. Conduit carries something: wires, pipes, connections between systems. What systems require connection in a basement that officially serves no purpose? The tour guide, when asked, smiles politely. "Storage," he says. "Old equipment. Nothing interesting." Nothing interesting. The same words, the same dismissal. The same carefully maintained ignorance. The persistence of secrets. These towers are heritage sites now, protected by law, maintained by historical societies, funded by government grants and public donations. Yet the closed rooms remain closed. The locked doors stay locked. The inventory goes uncatalogued, not because the secrets are dangerous, not because the equipment is fragile, but because no one in authority has decided to look. The past is still here, hiding in plain sight, behind staff doors and iron gates, in basements marked structural and cabinets marked only with numbers. The keepers are gone, the flames are extinguished, but the towers still hold what they were built to contain, and perhaps, after all this time, they are waiting for someone to finally ask the right questions. We have been asking the wrong question. For 200 years, historians have asked, how did lighthouses produce light? The answer seemed obvious: flame, lens, beam, ships saved. But what if light was not the primary function? What if it was merely the visible output, the final step in a process that began somewhere deeper inside the tower? Consider a factory. Smoke rises from the chimney. We see the smoke. We assume the factory exists to produce smoke, but the smoke is exhaust. The factory's purpose lies inside, in the machines, the processes, the work being done. The smoke is simply what escapes. What if lighthouse beams were the same? Not the purpose, but the exhaust, the system model. Return to the anatomy, foundation, service level, shaft, lantern room. Now add the anomalies, sealed chambers with controlled ventilation, acoustic dampening in rooms that should be silent, metal cabinets with gauges and switches, pipes connecting levels that officially serve separate functions, vibrations felt through stone, heat appearing before flame. Arrange these elements differently, not as accessories to a lamp, but as stages in a process. Stage 1. Energy enters the system. Through thermal gradients, atmospheric pressure, perhaps methods we no longer recognize or understand. Stage 2. The energy is processed, converted, regulated. The sealed chambers serve as conversion points, spaces where one form of energy becomes another. Stage 3. The processed energy rises through the shaft. The vertical channels are not ventilation. They are conduits, carrying something upward toward the lantern room. Stage 4. The lantern room receives the processed energy. The cabinets monitor and control. The gauges measure. The switches adjust. Stage 5. The energy is released. As light, as sound, as resonance patterns we may not have instruments to detect. The flame was never the source. The flame was the indicator. Proof that the system was functioning. A visible signal that energy was flowing through the tower and exiting as intended. The body revisited. The model proposed in Act 2 described the lighthouse as a body, feet, lungs, spine, eyes. Extend the metaphor. A body does not exist to produce breath. Breath is evidence of life, the visible rhythm of internal processes. The purpose lies deeper. Circulation, metabolism, thought. Lighthouses may have worked the same way. The beam was the breath. The tower's true function, its metabolism, its purpose, operated beneath visibility. The keepers maintained the system without understanding it. They trimmed wicks and polished lenses because those were the visible tasks. The invisible work happened automatically, deep in the sealed chambers, along the conduit-lined shafts. Inside the cabinets no one was trained to open. The implications. If this model is correct, then the modernization of lighthouses was not an upgrade. It was an amputation. Electric lights replaced flames. Automated systems replaced keepers. But in the process, the original infrastructure, the chambers, the shafts, the cabinets, was removed. Not upgraded, removed, because electricity could provide light without the rest of the system. The visible output could be maintained. The invisible function, whatever it was, could be quietly discontinued. The towers still stand, the beams still shine, but the body has been hollowed out. What remains is a skeleton, a shell, a memorial to something that once worked, and worked for reasons we were never told. If the towers were systems, processing energy, converting it, releasing it as light, then the source of that energy matters. The archives offer a clue, buried in keeper journals, inspection reports, and private letters. A pattern that appears again and again, always in the same context. Storms, not wind, not rain, not the ordinary dangers of coastal weather. Something else. Something about certain storms that made experienced keepers uneasy in ways they could not fully explain. Bell 2, England, 1862. The Bell 2 lighthouse stood on chalk cliffs overlooking the English Channel. The station was notorious for harsh conditions, exposed to gales that swept unimpeded across the open sea. Keepers rotated frequently. Few lasted more than 2 years. The isolation was extreme, the maintenance demanding, the weather punishing. But the journal of assistant keeper Samuel Wren, preserved at the Sussex Archaeological Society, reveals fears that went beyond ordinary hardship. Storms arrive differently here. Wren wrote in November 1862, "Before the wind comes, the tower begins to change. Metal hums, glass trembles. The air inside grows thick, pressing against the chest. The air inside grows thick. Wren describes the sensation repeatedly across his 18 months at Bell 2. The pressure, the weight, the feeling of standing inside something that was waking up. On the worst nights, the lantern room glows before we light it, a faint shimmer across the brass. Principal Keeper Howard forbids us from entering until the storm passes. He says the tower must do its work. The tower must do its work, not the keepers, not the flame. The tower itself, as if it were alive, responding to atmospheric conditions, processing the energy of the storm. Minot's Ledge, Massachusetts, 1878. Across the Atlantic, similar accounts emerge. Minot's Ledge, the I Love You light, sat on a submerged rock where Atlantic storms arrived with particular violence. The granite tower was designed to withstand 100-foot waves. It did. But the keepers inside experienced something the architects never anticipated. A letter from Keeper William Braddock to his brother, dated March 1878, describes a storm that struck without warning. The barometer dropped faster than I have ever seen. Within the hour, the tower was shaking, not from waves, from inside. The vibration climbed the walls. By the time it reached the lantern room, the lens was oscillating without the clockwork engaged. Oscillating without the clockwork engaged. The lens was designed to rotate via mechanical power, weights, gears, governors. Without the mechanism running, the lens should remain stationary. Yet, Braddock watched it move, driven by something else, something generated by the storm, channeled through the tower, expressed as physical motion. I could not remain in the lantern room, Braddock continues. The sensation in my chest became too strong, tingling, pressure, as if my heart was beating in a rhythm not my own. The atmospheric engine storms generate energy. This is not speculation, it is physics. Lightning carries millions of volts. Pressure differentials drive winds exceeding 100 miles per hour. Electromagnetic fields fluctuate wildly as charged particles collide. What if the towers were designed to capture this energy? To channel atmospheric electricity through their shafts, process it in their sealed chambers, and release it through their lantern rooms? The keepers felt it because they stood inside the machine while it operated at full capacity. The hum, the heat, the tingling in, the chest. These were not malfunctions. They were symptoms of a system working exactly as designed. A system powered by storms. Machines require operators. Systems require maintenance. Even automated processes need someone to watch, adjust, and report. The lighthouses had keepers. These men, and occasionally women, lived inside the towers for months at a time. They climbed the stairs each evening. They trimmed wicks, polished lenses, wound clockwork. They recorded weather conditions, ship sightings, oil consumption. But their true role may have been something else entirely. They were witnesses, custodians of a system they were never permitted to understand. The isolation requirement, lighthouse keepers were among the most isolated workers in the 19th century, stationed on rocks miles from shore, confined to towers accessible only in calm weather, cut off from families, communities, news. The official explanation was practical. Someone had to tend the light. The locations were remote by necessity. But the isolation served another purpose. Isolated men do not share stories. They do not compare notes with keepers at other stations. They do not write letters that might raise questions. When something strange happens, they have no one to tell, except the logbook, which their supervisors review. The keepers were selected for reliability, obedience, discretion, men who followed instructions without demanding explanations. The job advertisements from Trinity House, the United States Lighthouse Service, and other authorities share common language: steady character, trustworthy disposition, willingness to follow established procedures. Nowhere do they mention curiosity. Nowhere do they welcome questions. The instructions they followed. Keeper training manuals survive in maritime archives. Most content is mundane: how to fill oil reservoirs, how to clean lens prisms, how to record weather observations. But certain passages stand apart. The 1864 A manual for the United States Lighthouse Service includes a section titled Conduct During Unusual Atmospheric Conditions. The section is brief, 7 paragraphs. It instructs keepers to remain on the lower levels during severe electrical storms. to avoid the lantern room until normal conditions resume, to report any unusual behavior of equipment using a specific form, Form 17 SE, which is not included in the manual and appears in no surviving archive. Report unusual behavior using a form that does not exist. The instruction creates accountability without transparency. Keepers must document anomalies, but no one outside the service will ever see what they write. The toll. The psychological effects of lighthouse service are well documented. Depression, anxiety, alcoholism. Many keepers left the service after only a few years. Some never recovered. Official histories attribute these problems to isolation and monotony, the loneliness of watching empty horizons, the tedium of repetitive tasks. But the keeper journals suggest something more. Thomas Pellow at St. Catherine's, told not to write about the hum, reassigned to shore duties without explanation. William Baxter at Cape Otway, convinced the lighthouse operated itself, troubled in his final years. Samuel Wren at Bell 2, forbidden from entering the lantern room during storms, left the service after 18 months, citing nervous exhaustion. These men were not broken by boredom. They were broken by proximity to something they could not understand and were forbidden to discuss. The bargain. The keepers made an unspoken bargain: steady employment, housing, a pension for those who lasted. In exchange, they maintained systems without asking questions. They recorded anomalies on forms that vanished. They followed instructions that made no sense, and trusted that someone, somewhere, understood why. They carried the secret without knowing what the secret was. And when they left, retired, reassigned, or broken, they took their silence with them. The towers kept their mysteries. The keepers kept their peace. Until now. We have traveled far, through archives and blueprints, across oceans and centuries, into sealed chambers and vanished records, past keepers who felt the hum and were told to forget it. Now comes the hardest part, the honest accounting of what we know and what we do not. What the evidence supports. The majority of lighthouses operated exactly as history describes: oil, flame, lens, clockwork, dedicated keepers climbing stairs each night to bring light to dangerous waters. This is true. This is documented. This is not in dispute, but a subset of towers, positioned at critical maritime points, built during a specific window between 1840 and 1910, exhibit consistent anomalies that the standard explanation cannot address. Sealed chambers with controlled ventilation, vertical shafts exceeding practical requirements, equipment that appeared in photographs and then vanished, timing precision beyond mechanical capability, physical sensations reported by keepers across 5 continents, records systematically removed during modernization. These anomalies are not speculation. They exist in primary sources. They repeat across independent locations. They form a pattern too consistent for coincidence. Something additional was happening in these towers, something beyond oil and lens. 3 possible explanations. What was that something? Honesty requires presenting multiple possibilities, ranked by the evidence supporting each. Explanation 1. Advanced mechanical systems. The most conservative interpretation. These towers use sophisticated mechanical technology, weight-driven regulators, pressure systems, thermal converters, that was later simplified or replaced by electricity. The sealed chambers housed equipment that was effective but difficult to maintain. When electric power became available, authorities chose the simpler option. The old systems were removed, and no one saw reason to preserve documentation of obsolete machinery. This explanation accounts for the physical evidence. It does not require hidden knowledge or conspiracy. It assumes only that 19th century engineering was more advanced than popular histories acknowledge. Explanation 2. Experimental energy capture. A more ambitious interpretation. Some lighthouse authorities experimented with unconventional energy sources, atmospheric electricity, thermal gradients, resonance effects, before abandoning these methods in favor of centralized power grids. The towers at critical navigation points served as test sites. The experiments were not publicized because they were proprietary, dangerous, or simply unsuccessful in the long term. When grid electricity proved more reliable, the experimental systems were removed and forgotten. This explanation accounts for the unusual materials, the acoustic dampening, the storm-related phenomena. It requires accepting that some 19th century engineers explored technologies that mainstream science later abandoned. Explanation. 3. A pre-modern signaling network, the most expansive interpretation. The anomalous lighthouses were nodes in a coordinated system, a network designed before modern national boundaries solidified, using principles that were deliberately suppressed as political and technological paradigms shifted. The standardization across continents suggests shared knowledge. The systematic removal of records suggests intentional erasure. The pattern implies purpose beyond maritime safety, communication, energy distribution, or functions we cannot yet identify. This explanation accounts for the global consistency. It requires accepting the possibility of historical knowledge that has been actively hidden rather than passively forgotten. The honest position. We cannot prove which explanation is correct. The records that might have settled the question were removed, deliberately, carefully, across decades. What remains is the pattern, the anomalies, the silence where answers should be. The evidence points towards something, the archives point away from it. Between those two directions lies the mystery, intact, unexplained, waiting. We can say this with certainty. The official story is incomplete. What completed it remains, for now, in the shadows of sealed chambers and the margins of missing pages. The sun sets over the Atlantic. The sky burns orange, then crimson, then deep violet. The horizon swallows the last light. Darkness spreads across the water like a blanket being drawn over the world. And then, a beam. White. Steady. Sweeping across the waves in a rhythm unchanged for over a century. The lighthouse still stands, still shines, still guides ships through waters that have claimed thousands of lives. But something is different now. What remains? The towers endure. Portland Bill, Bishop Rock, Cape Hatteras, Point Reyes, Fastnet, St. Augustine, the Lizard. Some operate automatically, their lamps triggered by sensors, their lenses turned by electric motors. No keeper climbs the stairs at dusk. No hand trims the wick. No eye watches the horizon for approaching storms. Others have become museums, heritage sites, tourist attractions where visitors climb spiral staircases and pose for photographs beside polished brass. The official plaques tell the simple story. Oil, flame, lens. Brave keepers saving lives. It is a good story. A comforting story. A story that fits neatly into the space between gift shop and exit. But beneath the visitor centers, behind the staff doors, inside the locked basements, the bones of the old system remain. Sealed chambers still sealed. Conduits still running through stone walls. Mounting brackets still visible where cabinets once hung. The towers remember what the plaques forget. The question that persists. Stand at the base of any historic lighthouse. Look up. 100 feet of stone or iron or concrete rising against the sky. Ask yourself, why this much structure for a single flame? Why foundations engineered to absorb vibration? Why shafts 3 times larger than ventilation requires? Why acoustic dampening in rooms that should be silent? Why equipment that vanishes between photographs without explanation? The flame is small, a few inches of fire, burning quietly at the center of a massive lens. The tower is enormous, overbuilt, over-engineered, designed for forces that a simple lamp could never generate. The disproportion tells its own story. The architecture confesses what the records deny. These buildings were not lamps. They were instruments, machines, nodes in a system we have forgotten how to read. The inheritance. We are the inheritors of incomplete history. Every generation receives the past as a gift, edited, curated, simplified for easy consumption. We learn the stories that survived. We forget the stories that were removed. The lighthouses stand as monuments to that forgetting. Beautiful, functional, hollow. But the evidence remains for those willing to look, in archives, in blueprints, in the journals of keepers who felt the hum and wrote it down before they were told to stop. The mystery is not solved. Perhaps it cannot be solved, not without the records that were taken, the equipment that was stripped, the knowledge that was deliberately allowed to fade. But the mystery is preserved, carried forward, handed to the next generation with a question attached. What were these towers really for? The final light night falls completely now. The beam sweeps the darkness. Ships adjust their courses, guided by a light they trust without questioning. The lighthouse does its visible work, but somewhere beneath, in chambers sealed for 150 years, along shafts that once carried something more than air, the tower holds its secret. Patient, silent, watching. History loves the clean story. But towers like these were built for storms, not for simple answers.